Hello, my name is Silvester Carl Henderson. I am the President and CEO of Professor for Life Incorporated, and I am so pleased this evening to interview Dr. Robert Mossi Alexander. Welcome, Dr. Alexander.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Henderson. We met a few years ago, and I've been dying to get on the podcast and just, chop game with you and just, share good insights, among great minds.
Listen, thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. Could you please introduce yourself to the digital media academic world? Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up. Please share your academic journey. Where did you go to college, attend college, and all those wonderful things?
Absolutely. So I typically introduce myself as a father. I'm a family man. I'm a dad first. I love being a provider. I love being a father to my wonderful children. I have 3 grown-up kids, and I also have 3 kids that are in the house right now through marriage. So, I'm working hard as a parent. Just trying to keep my boys on the straight and narrow. Right. I only got 1 girl among all my children. Shout out to Lauren Alexander, my beautiful 23-year-old daughter. So I grew up, I was born in San Francisco, and, my parents spent a couple years in San Francisco as my dad had gotten to a master's program at San Francisco State, and he was a playwright. So he wrote for the San Francisco Mime Troupe, and he also wrote for the Lorraine Hansberry Theater. A couple years passed, they started to get a lay of the land because my parents are from the East Coast. And they saw that it was cheaper to live in Oakland. So they bought property in Oakland. Unbeknownst to them, it was a beautiful home. I grew up in a beautiful home. We had a library. We had big backyard. This was in East Oakland on 78th and Hillside. End of the heroin epidemic, beginning of the crack era. So, them being a little naive and being from the East Coast and not knowing how we rock on the West Coast.
Okay.
A rude awakening. So I kind of always had, 1 foot in academia and 1 foot in the neighborhood. So I named my nonprofit hood to higher ed because I kept meeting a lot of folks, a lot of youngsters that were at the margins of life, or when they came into my office, my counseling office at the ends of college, they would always describe to me never thinking about going to college and, dismantling and going through imposter syndrome. So I thought that was an apt name for my org because naturally students that were coming from low socioeconomic communities, they just gravitated towards me because of my own background, being from East Oakland. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I've spent a lifetime, I've spent the last 20 years just, tearing down doors for students that are underserved. I was hired as a student success and retention services counselor, and we housed the Puente Project, first year experience, the our Umoja scholars, and I was the point person. I was a counselor under all these programs until I became chair of counseling. So that's a little bit about my background. And you said my education. I'm a product of the community college. So I went to Chabot College. And Chabot started Puente. They started Umoja, which was then Daraja. Transferred from Chabot to San Francisco State and got a bachelor's in psychology with a minor in counseling. Took some time off from school. I didn't immediately go into grad school. I worked at Federal Express, did some odd jobs. And then the counseling program at St. Mary's came calling. And I ended up being accepted into the St. Mary's program and having looked back. 2 years ago, I finished my doctorate at the University of San Francisco in international multicultural ed, but I minored in organizational leadership because one day I may want to pivot into an administrator role. So that's a little bit about me, sir.
Okay, thank you. Can you describe your work more in detail, your work and obligations as a professor and counselor for De Anza College?
No doubt. Great question. I teach multiple classes. We tend to rotate them and a lot of the class offerings are based on seniority. So I teach college success. We call it life skills for higher ed. Other campuses may call it college success. I teach an intro to college. I teach human sexuality. I teach career life planning, and I also teach stress management. And again, we're in a quarter system, so I don't teach all of those classes, in tandem. I might have 1 or 2 classes per quarter, right? And the main thing of what I do is I meet students, whether it's an appointment or a drop-in, and I fancy myself, this is what I've been told I've been good at, is building rapport quickly with the student, especially if it's a student that, is a, first year college student, first generation college student, I should say. That means neither one of their parents graduated from a college, and that could be community college or 4-year. So I tend to, they send those students to me, which is funny because even though we're all trained in counseling, they tend to send the students that are first generation to me. And like I described earlier, the ones that are coming from, underserved communities. So primarily my job is working with students to figure out their goal. As some students want to get a certificate at my community college. Some students want to get an associate's degree. Some students want to do all of the above, get an associate's degree and transfer. So a lot of students kind of have it going on. They know what they want to do. And I love helping those students as well. But I really take pride in that student that doesn't know what they want to do. And sometimes we figure it out in several sessions of counseling. Other times I would recommend they take a career life planning class that I teach and some of my colleagues have taught as well. And when I see that student's light bulb go off, they figured out what they want to do, it's just a magical moment. And that's pretty much what I live for. So I've met students at the very beginning of their academic journey, right? Because they're incoming freshmen, right? And they take my intro to college. And sometimes students think that since I taught them intro to college, I'm the only counselor that they can see, and I don't correct them. I like working with those students because I like seeing those students come in from the beginning and then also seeing them graduate and transfer. So from the beginning to the end, I'm there for them. And like I mentioned, I just take really great pride in my work that I've done, over the years, over the last 20 years being in academia.
Wow.
So, yeah.
You know what, Dr. Alexander, how many students are you responsible for during a typical week, you think, as a counselor?
During a typical week, I would say anywhere between 40 to 50. If we're including classes that I've taught, that can go up to low hundreds, because I typically have about 35 to 40 students per class. So just one-on-one drop-in or appointments, it's about 35 to 40 students per week.
Now, Deanna's in Cupertino, correct?
That is correct.
Now, being in Cupertino, this is perhaps an unusual question, but it may not be. Do you tend to have a lot of students of color in Cupertino? Because isn't Cupertino considered to be a pretty well-off area?
That's an excellent question, Dr. Henderson. We tend to have a lot of students that are coming into De Anza with a lot of advanced placement courses. They went to some of the best high schools, so we don't have a large population of students of color. Right? We don't. I want to say. Let me make that correction. We don't have a lot of African American students. Our highest population would be Asian and white, and then second is Latino, and then way down the line is African American. So I gravitated towards working for student success and retention services because it allowed me the opportunity to work with our African American population through Umoja or some of our programs that work with athletics. And I started to kind of, wonder if I was the person that was, the catalyst for their success, right? Or whether or not, they would be successful if they met any counselor. So what I decided to do was just volunteer everywhere. And then I call this public scholarship because this is kind of my way of extending my reach in academia, not just at my campus. So the first place that I ever volunteered for was the San Jose Rites of Passage. And that was primarily for African-American boys that were transitioning from high school to college. And we all kind of have our specialty. We had some gentlemen that came in and represented law enforcement. We had another gentleman that was an attorney. We had a gentleman that was that represented constructions. And obviously my specialty was college. So I would lecture to our rites of passage boys on the best practices for getting into college. Not only getting into college, but being successful. I also volunteered for the OK Mentor program in Oakland for a number of years. And as I was doing my dissertation, I found out that they were looking for volunteers for what was then called the Prison University Project inside of San Quentin. And they later changed the name to Mount Tamalpais College. And I've been volunteering with them off and on for 2 years. And that is what my dissertation is about. And I named it Reclaiming Our Humanity because for anybody that has ever been incarcerated, you lose your humanity when you go to jail, right? You may not have a great relationship with the COs, correctional officers. They tend to treat you like trash when you are imprisoned, right? You have to wake up at odd hours in order to eat breakfast or go to court. You're wearing clothes. You're wearing clothes that other people have worn. They're not your own clothes. There are cavity searches that, your privacy is invaded at all times. So I named my dissertation Reclaiming Our Humanity and How Education and Mentorship Reduces Recidivism for African-American males while reducing recidivism and building upon the foundations of success through education and mentorship. And out of that came my award-winning documentary entitled Reclaiming Our Humanity. So I'm sorry, Dr. Silvester, I know that was a long answer, but
No, not at all.
We do not have a lot of people of color at the answer, just to answer your question. And I had to seek opportunities to work with students of color that I feel like my style of counseling they would benefit from.
Now, how do you feel that your work assists the students of color that you do work with, and how does it support the concept of higher education?
So can you repeat that one more time?
How does your work, how does your advocacy work assist the students of color that you do work with, and how does that work also support the concept of the principle of higher education?
I just love working with students of color. I love working with the underserved population, and I think my advocacy that is centered around dismantling the school to prison pipeline and creating that prison to school pipeline. And I went a step further. I would even go as far as say prison to PhD, because I know that it's possible.
Yes.
And I've been on the advisory board for our Rising Scholars program within the community college system. So I work with all students, and I love working with all students. But when it's that student in need, I'm thinking about that equity, equality picture where there's these three people that are standing behind the fence, and then they give one of them a block, they give all of them a block in order to see over the fence. But for the person that's height challenged, they still can't see over the fence, right? So I envision equity as giving that student enough help or guide. Help that term could be used loosely. It could be guidance, it could be counseling, it could be mentorship, it could be culturally relevant teaching, giving that student the support that's most needed in order for them to be successful. And sometimes that doesn't look like giving every student the same thing, right? Sometimes that looks like giving that student that's most in need a little bit more guidance and support, right? And just seeing them from inception, as soon as they get to the community college all the way till they reach that 4-year degree. And I have students that I've met 5 years ago, 6, 7, 10 years ago that still keep in contact with me. I had one student start off wanting to get a paralegal certificate, right? And they fell in love with working in the court system, and they saw that they were doing a lot of the work of the lawyer. So they eventually got into law school in San Francisco and ended up becoming a lawyer. So having an entry-level position like a paralegal, a legal aid, led them to becoming an attorney. And these are some of the success stories that I hold dear, right? And I have that in my back pocket, to where if I'm ever doubting myself, or I just get sad and I'm wondering about my own impact, I'll be like, well, this student met me, first year, and now they're very successful at UCLA, at Berkeley, right? At Cal State East Bay, at San Francisco State. So I have these success stories. Dr. Henderson, I real quick, I want to read to you the Article 26. This comes from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right?
Okay.
And it says, everyone has a right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher ed shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. So we cannot ever, you and I coming from the community college world, and I know that you've worn many hats just based on previous conversations, but that's the one thing I love about community colleges. Like, community colleges have the word community in it, right? So we are supposed to be working with those surrounding communities, but sometimes we have a good relationship with community colleges that might be in the near area, right? And how we foster getting that student to come from our community college onto 4 years, onto bigger and better things that impacts their original educational goal, right? You have to be over the age of 18, or have a GED or a high school diploma. So if you fall in any of those categories, the community college, we welcome you. And I love it. I wouldn't change it. This is the field I was destined to be in.
Well, Dr. Alexander, I want to just assure you that you should never doubt yourself, because in any area regarding higher education, because I can actually sense and feel your enlightenment as you discuss your passion. Having said that, who influenced you to want to become an academic professor?
I think it was my mom. I got lucky. I am not a first generation college student. My mother she was a librarian, and she worked for Oakland Unified School District most of her career. So, and I tell this story all the time. I was one of the few households growing up where we actually had a library in our home, right? And I was, among my friends, I was the only person that had an Encyclopedia Britannica. And so this is, and I don't care if I'm dating myself at all, but this is before the internet, right? So
okay.
Students my East Oakland friends would come over to my home whenever they had an assignment, a book report, something to look up that was going to help them do well on the education. So my dad being a playwright and my mom being a librarian, they really put the bug in my ear in terms of, hey, education can open up opportunities, right? If we look at the statistics in terms of how much someone with a high school diploma makes, right? They can do okay. They can still make a living, no shade. But then let's look at the individual that has a bachelor's degree. Okay, they doing pretty good too. Let's look at the individual that has a master's degree. They can make a little bit more than that person that has a bachelor's. Let's look at the individual that has an Ed.D, PhD, right? A law degree, a professional degree in dentistry, right? Or anything of the like. And that salary increases each step of the way, right? So if you come from Oakland, like myself, it's about making money, but I was concerned about making money as well as being fulfilled in my career. And we refer to that career congruency is when your passion is in line with what you want to do, right? So that's career congruency. That's kind of, what I sought after, right? So you say if you're working in the field and you're doing something you love, you never work a day in your life. And I know that's a cliche to say that, but it's absolutely true, right? And that might be, you may be feeling the same way when you teach music, right? Or you're conducting or you're coaching students along in that way. This is how I view the field of counseling and teaching. I love teaching, and even though I got my doctorate, I am in pursuit of an ethnic studies certificate right now at San Francisco State. So I'm what you call one of those lifelong learners. I'm not afraid to say that I'm a nerd. I seek knowledge, and I think this may have been contentious for me back in the day. Growing up in the neighborhood that I did, right? But now that I've found myself and who I want to be, I don't sugarcoat who I am. I just love learning. That's just who I am.
Wow. As a noted author, what are your most significant writing accomplishments? And please describe one of your recent textbooks, Hood to Higher Education.
Absolutely. So my very first book that I wrote, it's called Can't Let Nobody Ride My Bike. And it was loosely based.
Okay.
It's loosely based on my own life between the ages of 12 to 14, right? Going through puberty, developing this critical consciousness in a neighborhood that sometimes I felt like didn't value education or didn't value a bookworm. Also learning about the struggle and the revolutionaries, that paved the way, like like Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale and the Black Panther Party for self-defense. In that, going through the 1989 earthquake, dealing with hormones and trauma that I experienced in junior high school at King States, where there was a drug deal gone bad and there was a dead body left in front of our campus, and them not having the resources or the wherewithal to not only close the school but send us to trauma counseling or grief counseling for dealing with that. We had to go to first period after seeing this yellow tape around this gentleman laying stiff and cold as a board, because he had been there overnight. So Can't Let Nobody Ride My Bike was my first book, and that was an expression that we said in my Oakland community in the 700 zone of East Oakland, because if you got a bike for your birthday, if you got a bike for Christmas, and one of your older peers want to ride your bike, you might not see it again. So we would just always your parents, your folks would be like, you better not let nobody ride your bike. So we would, me and my friends would always be like, hey, look, can't let nobody ride my bike. And I addressed bullying in this. I addressed having sex at a young age, or being intimidated by peer pressure, to act out and be promiscuous, right? It's a good read. This is what I've been told. This is available on Amazon. I also wrote a book, and I'm working on the sequel to it. I also wrote a book after I learned that young black and Latina girls are the fastest demographic that are going into the carceral system, right? Because they interpret, some women's, I'm not, for lack of a better term, outgoingness or standing up for themselves as defiance or combativeness. Even when it relates to physical and sexual abuse. So we know about the school to prison pipeline, but attached to that is zero tolerance that typically can affect men and women, boys and girls. So I named this She Hit Me First. This is young Jamila. Many of my stories are developed in Oakland or come from Oakland. And young Jamila she doesn't play around. She has she has a younger sister, and her mom teaches her how you deal with disrespect, or somebody getting out of line with you is by hitting them. So she takes that to her school, and she gets in trouble behind it, right? If somebody smarts off to her, she got hands for that person. But it's not until later on, when she meets a mentor in her elementary school, that teaches her conflict resolution techniques, and how to kind of manage your emotion, that EQ, your emotional quotient, right? How do we regulate our emotions as a young youth growing up in urban areas? So I feel like I did a good job of tackling that, and she hit me first. So far, 2 children's books, and I've gone to classrooms in Oakland and given books away, and have done readings for different schools, different elementary schools in Oakland. Is kind of my way of giving back. And I love sparking the young reader's mind, and speaking about the critical literacy that's needed. Because now what they're doing is, if you're not up to a certain reading level by the 3rd and 4th grade, this is how they decide on who's going to college and who's going to prison. They are trying to connect literacy rates, low literacy rates, to prison outlook, right? And sometimes they use this demographics, the low literacy rate demographics, in order to justify building more prisons, right? And we have roughly 30 prisons in the state of California, right? We have 24 CSUs, 10 UCs. So we see that we have just as many prisons, if not more, than we have 4-year colleges, right? And shout out to the CSU system. This is the biggest public institution in the United States, in the world.
That's right. Listen, it is really nice to hear you talk about all of your passion as it relates to helping inner city children, inner city kids. I would like to ask you, what challenges have you faced as a man of color in higher education? Just not at Deanna, but just in general.
That's an excellent question, Dr. Henderson. I think the main challenges that I've faced has to do with like moving upward mobility, right? So you would think, since one has been at a particular institution as long as I have, once you get your doctorate, these doors will come flying open. But sometimes they are a lot of political. There's politics that are involved working at these community colleges, and you and I have talked off record about this. But to our viewers, just because you get a master's or a doctorate doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to be the pathway to upward mobility, right? And when that happens, you have to be flexible, and you have to be willing to know your own worth. And if that's something you really want to do, you may have to leave that institution that you have this great history with in order to make that happen. So that's kind of been one of the challenges. I've witnessed jealousy, after I got my doctorate, and peers didn't have it. So being sidelined on certain committees that I wanted to either be a part of, or to when they're looking for the president or the chair of this particular committee, there's some hating going on, right? Just based on my background and the fact that I could connect with multiple communities and kind of build and galvanize people to move towards a shared vision is kind of in my wheelhouse. This is something that I'm good at. So there's definitely when you are a bureaucrat in the bureaucracy, it can always be challenging, right? But how do we stay steadfast and keep handling our business without letting that get to you? It's something that you have to constantly be mindful of, practicing self-care, right? Not putting everything into your job. I consider myself an artivist. Like I've made films, I've written books that tackle social issues, right? So, this is something that I love doing, and I'm able to kind of compartmentalize. Okay, this is what's happening at my community colleges. This is what I do, but I'm also good at this, and this is how I connect, with inner city youth and my own community. So, overall, I'm happy, but those are some of the challenges that I've dealt with.
Well, you know what, Dr. Alexander, I'm 64 years old, and you've knocked on my door.
Yes, sir.
But the reality is that I was just sharing this with a colleague of mine who was the world famous ethnomusicologist last night. And I was telling him that the harsh reality is that the majority of black male professionals in higher education, when they're able even to land a job as a professor, which is really the greatest role in higher education, if you follow them 30 or 40 years down the line, generally, for an African American male, they're still doing the same thing. If you follow a non-African American male, a Caucasian male, an Asian male, and sometimes, many times, a Latino male or a Latino woman or other cultures, they've had opportunities. The challenge is that higher education simply redesign its principles based on what is happening in the current political social world. And if you look at the current political social world now, African American male, especially family men, are really not the topic that people are concerned about. People are comfortable with African American men going to jail. They're comfortable with African American men being in certain professions, and then they bring them down. But African American men generally people are not comfortable when they are in major leadership roles. And when you start getting into leadership roles such as a dean, a vice president, or president, from a salary perspective, those positions are equivalent to being in the cabinet of the president of the United States. The salaries are equal. So don't always remember this, just from an OG to a young man like you. Never allow the system, as you have done, not to, I would say, define you. You continue to allow your passion to be what it is, and expand that passion and overlook the foolishness of the system, because the system is not necessarily there to be your friend. The system is supposed to be there to educate, but unfortunately sometimes what happens, and I say many times what happens, is the politics do get in the way. And people, when they're trying to gain employment and gain jobs and get status, they'll cut you, stab you, do whatever. But I've always believed that good people at the very end of life always succeed. So
yes.
I want to congratulate you on being that good person. And having said that, what community work have you accomplished for the improvement of the protected class with respect to the current DEI movement?
I think another excellent question. What I'm doing to dismantle the school to prison pipeline is the main thing. I've been focused on this. I have over 6 years of research that started at the very beginning of my doctorate journey at the University of San Francisco, that led me to work for Mount Tamalpais, formerly the Prison University Project. I've also been in meetings. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this brother, Dorsey Dunn, but his organization is called All of Us or None, and I've been in meetings with these folks to help ban the box. Right. This is where in California they are no longer allowed to put that checkbox on a job application asking if you've ever been convicted of a felony, right? Because a lot of people dread that question. So, this is for public entities and governmental entities that's no longer allowed. So, for our viewers, if you see that and it's a public or government entity, asking you that question about your prior record, this is illegal. So my dissertation, The Foundations of Success for Formerly Incarcerated Black Men. This is my public scholarship. This is my creation to the world. I graduated at the end of 2022, and my dissertation has over 400 downloads since then. So, I wanted my work to be far-reaching. And instead of going in there with a little handheld mini quarter, I'm good friends with Chardonnay Mason, who is my videographer and a friend of mine. Shout out to Chardonnay Mason Creations. Instead of going there with a handheld tape recorder, we went in there guns blazing with a video recorder, and I taped all of my interviews that were going to be in my dissertation. And then I figured out a way to kind of weave these stories together to tell a big story in terms of how education and mentorship could reduce recidivism, and how I wasn't interested in some of my friends growing up that treat the carceral system or going to jail or prison as like a revolving door. I was interested in how African American men got out and stayed out. Right? Because, we have a systemic problem with Black men, being the largest population in prisons. Right? And this didn't happen, overnight. There were things that were put in place systemically that directly impact us. Laws that, and we could do a whole nother interview on this, but laws created that have hurt African American communities post-slavery. Right? So this is the work that I'm focused on primarily, and I wouldn't change that. I want to leave an indelible mark on this planet, right? As they say, leave this world a better place than when you found it, and that's what I hope to do, Dr. Henderson.
I remain positive that you've done that, and you will continue to do that. Can you discuss, we have just 2 more questions to ask you.
Yeah.
Please discuss your goals, your future projects, and some of your enlightenments regarding new innovations.
Absolutely. So I am looking, now that I have one documentary out of the way, I'm working on a second one. And this is, I want to call this What's Culture Got to Do with Education? Because working at various community colleges, I've seen teachers, professors that have that passion, and they talk as they listen as much as they talk, right? They listen as much as they talk, meaning they're listening to their students in terms of their background, where they come from, what they eat, what they did growing up, and they use that to create and enrich their assignments, right? And I being culturally relevant, some people, Goldie Muhammad calls it, cultural, historical relevance, right? Where she compares, some of the Black thought leaders, or these writing, what's the term that she used? These writing workshops that we had in the 1700s, early 1800s, these writing communities where African American thought leaders and scholars flourished. So how come that can't happen now? So I'm really concerned with how professors and teachers K through 12, K through 14, how we use the student's background in order to enhance learning, right? Because oftentimes, if you go to any country outside of US, we may be educated different with this whole idea, especially K through, I want to say 5th grade, where you just have one teacher in front of the class and you're supposed to get all your knowledge from this one teacher. It's ridiculous, and this is something that has been kind of passed down like, oh, this works, but it doesn't work for a lot of learners, or when we talk about multiple intelligence, intelligence is. Some learners don't learn the way of just sitting down in a seat and just taking notes based on that particular topic or subject. So, I'm going to be interviewing folks like you, folks that are seasoned in the educational game, but I also want to talk to students to kind of find out how they best learn and incorporate that into this next project that I'm doing. So be on the lookout of what's culture got to do with education.
Okay.
I think you asked about future project. I just want to make sure that I'm answering your question. You asked about future projects. That's what I'm working on right now, and I'm super excited about this one. I've so far interviewed Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade out of San Francisco State, and I've also interviewed soon to be Dr. Hadari Davis, who developed Youth Speaks. His mother created Young, Gifted, and Black, and he took the baton and ran with it. So this documentary is going to be very powerful, and it's going to be an eye-opener for educators in terms of how they can enhance their own curriculum that they're putting out into the world.
Wow, that's wonderful. Do you have any final thoughts and ideas you would like to communicate?
Yes, for the viewers, check out Reclaiming Our Humanity. It's on Amazon Prime. If you don't want to pay for it and you're not opposed to commercials in watching the documentary, it's also on Tubi. And this is not only good for people that have been incarcerated. This is for educators. This is for youngsters that might need an inspiring message, right? Like, you don't have to necessarily do wrong in order to do right. Right? We want to do right from the beginning, right? But this inspiring message and story are about gentlemen that made a way out of no way when their backs against the wall and people, told them, you've been to jail, you've been to prison, your life is over. And they said, no, it's not. My life has just begun, and I'm not going to let my environment or my mistakes define me. So if folks out there that have a chance, check out Reclaiming Our Humanity. And I would love to come to your school and do a professional development, with you and your teachers alike.
Wow. Thank you. Dr. Alexander, Dr. Robert Mossi Alexander.
Yes, sir.
I want to take the time to thank you for coming on this podcast. Professor Henderson has, I've interviewed thousands of academics all over the country, all over not only the United States, but as far as Great Britain and Africa and all over the world. And it is so nice to see a young man who is so passionate about helping men of color.
Yes.
As I age gracefully, hopefully, I remain prayerful and hopeful that your heart and your passion will never dwindle and will stay strong and vibrant, because this 45 to 50 minutes of our interview has really been a wonderful, vibrant conversation. On behalf, as the President and CEO of Professor for Life Incorporated, I want to thank you once again for taking the time out of your schedule. Be blessed. God bless you. And I hope to talk with you soon. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Peace.
Take care.
God bless.